My name is Dr. Ian Storch. I'm a board-certified gastroenterologist and osteopathic physician, and you are listening to DO or Do Not. If you're interested in joining our team or have suggestions or comments, please contact us at doordonotpodcast.com. Share our link with your friends and like us on Apple Podcasts, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Good morning. My name is Suzanne Char, and I'm a rising third-year medical student at Ohio University Heritage College of Osteopathic Medicine, and you are listening to DO or Do Not podcast. On today's episode, we interview Dr. David Shumway. Dr. Shumway was invited to speak at the recommendation of Dr. Jennifer Haller after a recent presentation to the American Osteopathic Association on artificial intelligence and its importance to the osteopathic community. Dr. Shumway will give us a definition and a history of AI and explain to us its relevance to modern medicine and his thoughts on the future of the technology. He will discuss his own path from military family as the son of a Navy pilot to his undergraduate education in Oregon. He will speak to us about the importance of his gastroenterology mentor who sparked his interest in medicine. He will discuss his gap years working in Epcot, Disney, where he met his wife. Finally, he will tell us about his time at A.T. Still, Arizona, followed by a residency in internal medicine with the HPSP Airforce Scholarship, and how his career has come full circle as he prepared to follow in the footsteps of his father through a fellowship in Aerospace Medicine, while spending time with his wife's family in Great Britain. We hope you learn as much from Captain Shumway as we did.
All right, David Shumway, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Hey, I'm super glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
We're having you on the podcast tonight at the recommendation of Jennifer Haller, who is on the board of trustees of the American Osteopathic Association. And she told me that you gave an amazing presentation on artificial intelligence and that there was no question we needed to have you on the podcast.
Wow.
So let's jump right into AI. I feel like everybody knows what AI is. So can you just start with giving us like a 2-minute brief history on how AI came about and what it actually is?
AI is not new. Clinical AI isn't new either. If you've ever used Epic or Cerner or any EMR and got one of those annoying pop boxes that tell you, hey, did you forget to add an A1C, or you get like an automated billing query or something, then congratulations, you've already interacted with AI in healthcare. AI has been around in imaging. Actually, one of the first clinical AI systems was the Mycin system, which was invented to help diagnose like bloodstream infections back in the late 70s. The fact we're hearing about AI right now is really because of large language models, the most famous of which being ChatGPT. So large language models are this massive leap forward in AI technology because the computers that form the basis of their neural networks have reached the level of capacity where now with the internet and our server farms and our computer capacity, we can now finally start to simulate artificial intelligence with a level of complexity similar to human thought. So these large language models like ChatGPT are basically exposed 100 billion words of text. They're trained on like the entire internet, everything that humans have ever produced that's freely available within reason. And then they're trained using deep learning and algorithmic learning, which are all forms of machine learning, where different pieces of information are given different weights and importance. And eventually you sort of simulate this network that is behaving very much like a human brain. And these models are really, really optimized towards producing language, generative AI, which means AI that's meant to generate an output. The way that these things work is they essentially complete a sentence word by word at a time that's meant to respond to a prompt entered by a user. And the way that they do this is they start with one word, and then they come up with a list of words and probabilities that those words might follow the word before it. And in doing so, they eventually complete an entire string of text. Sounds pretty funky and robotic, but I have a 4-year-old daughter. If you've ever listened to like a 4-year-old go through their language expression and language learning pathway, my 4-year-old will repeat the same sentence like 5 or 6 times until she finds the right word. It's kind of like that's the way we do things, you know? That's the way that we produce language, in a string of words to complete a sentence. What's interesting about like ChatGPT and other large language models is that this list of probabilities, it doesn't always pick the highest rank, like the most probable word, because when you do that, for reasons that are still not well understood, you often get this very robotic, non-human sounding sentence. So the way to make more human sounding language is to pick these lower ranked words. And Alan Turing was the father of AI. And he devised this test. And he said, the way that we know that AI has finally really arrived is we'll be able to interact with it and not be able to distinguish AI from a human. So when GPT-3 came out, they did a study with several thousand virtual therapy patients on an app called Coco. The subjects in the experiment were unable to tell if they were talking to a human therapist or an AI therapist. And in several other studies, they've actually shown that human reviewers will often prefer the AI's responses in terms of both its accuracy and its emotional intelligence, which is really weird considering that we're talking about a robot. But this is the that we live in, and this is where we're at. We basically have this whole new era of intelligent computers that we can actually finally talk to as if they were our peers.
David, it's all super interesting for a doctor. What does this mean? Why don't you start us with, you're the DO AI guy, right? You're lecturing to the AOA Board of Trustees on AI as a medical resident, which is super amazing. But how did you first become interested in AI? What did you use the AI for? And then we'll talk a little bit about what people are doing with AI now.
There are people in the osteopathic community that are doing a lot of amazing work with this kind of technology. You know, Dr. Cole Zanetti and Dr. Samir Sood. And when I started residency, I got really into voice recognition and dictation. One example being Dragon systems by Nuance. That just seemed really natural to me. Get into medicine, it's always a little sobering to find out what kind of a tiny chunk actual patient care ends up being of the jobs, all of this other stuff that we have to do, like the mountains of documentation we have to do, the clicking through the EMR, all the administrative stuff. I just got really invested really quickly in trying to figure out the fastest, most efficient, and best way to do things that would allow me to claw back time and allocate that to more of the parts of my life that I enjoyed and learning medicine. So I got really interested in voice dictation. A lot of my co-residents were hand typing notes, on the keyboard, and I was finding ways to breeze through the note by dictating. And that led me to this rabbit hole where many of the voice recognition systems, like Dragon Medical, for instance, has a whole macro functionality. And Dragon Medical actually had an entire script writing window. I got really into making Dragon do all kinds of crazy things. At the same time, I was also writing a lot for the DO, and through corresponding with Nuance and trying to figure out like more stuff that I could do with Dragon, I became aware of an AI scribe that they were working on at the time. And I saw a demo of this at ACP in San Diego, and I was just completely blown away. The guy from Nuance basically had his phone out, and he had one of the other doctors pretend to be a patient, and they went through a simulated patient encounter, and it wrote a whole note up. So I wrote an article for the DO about what I felt like the pros of artificial intelligence in healthcare were going to be. That led to me presenting at some medical conferences in various places around the country. And I presented at OMED and started to get involved in the AOIA, and probably eventually led the invite to the Board of Trustees. I also wrote a paper in the Journal of Osteopathic Medicine with my old college roommate, who's a lawyer, about medical malpractice consideration that we felt like was the first deep diving and comprehensive case law review in terms of what we thought the cases that would actually be cited in future medical malpractice issues.
Can you just give us a 2-minute summary, other than doing notes, which is huge, obviously,
right,
for an internist or a family practitioner? what other applications are AI being actively used for in medicine now?
For most physicians, the use cases are going to start at virtual medical scribing. That's the experience where you can walk into a patient room, you can talk to a patient, and then you come out of the room and you have a fully written and correctly coded note that you can review and co-sign. That alone is a game changer. The other use case for AI right now is as a point of care clinical decision support. So we can't know everything. So everybody uses point of care decision support tools like UpToDate, Dynamed, etc. We have to search those tools using our understanding, training as physicians to find the answers that we need from that tool. Sometimes we have questions that we don't even know how to phrase correctly, right? And so that's why as physicians, a consult or something that we frequently call like a curbside colloquially is very important, because you can talk to someone who has more experience than you do, and they'll be able to come up with more of a focused answer to a question. So AI is starting to fill that kind of role as being, instead of you searching on UpToDate, you can go to AI and say, hey, what should I do about this incredibly specific patient case with all of these things that doesn't really fit the guidelines? And the AI can look at the entire body of medical research. And these AIs are often trained on like verified and peer-reviewed information, like very high quality source material. And they can look at it and kind of at the level of a consultant will be able to give you what they think you need.
David, just to talk to you about a couple of places that I know AI are relevant. So like in GI, it's very interesting. There are polyp detection systems with colonoscopy that pick up polyps. I think for that, for my practice, for example, number one, I'm pretty good at picking up polyps. I don't know that it adds that much. And two, there's a significant expense. So it's a very interesting thing. Like I've been demoed on some of the systems. And again, number one, I don't think there's much value add. Number two, it's picking up very small diminutive polyps potentially, which again, of course, I don't miss anything. But if there was something I wasn't seeing, they're so small, it's not making a clinical difference. And number three, there's the expense. So one of the other places that we have it in GI that's interesting is capsule endoscopy, which are these very long studies. And again, they're working on machine learning. There are a few companies that are working on AI for that, which may significantly cut down the amount of time that it takes to read. I think they're very interesting. Some GIs think they're very boring, but I think that's cool. So maybe you can comment on those technologies. And then the radiologists, I think, are very worried about AI in a lot of places because recognition of films and CT findings, people are worried that it may put them out of a job one day. So can you comment on those two areas and what you think of AI and how it fits in?
So device-based AI, which is what you're talking about, is a whole separate topic. The device-based AI is regulated by the FDA and has been. I actually went to ACG in Vancouver this year, and I remember there was a bunch of booths. And I remember the main takeaway that I had for it is that it probably improved the polyp detection rate, but maybe the more meaningful outcomes hadn't been shown yet. Something similar is happening in the world of echocardiography right now as well. Now, they have been able to show with the echocardiographers that AI-assisted echo machine, to get measurements and whatnot, has vastly outperformed the human techs. And of course, the radiologists, I don't think they have to be as worried as people think. I'm in the Air Force, and one of the things that I always think of with AI is that AI might be able to fly the plane, but you always need a human behind the joystick to take over in case something goes wrong. So AI, for instance, in radiology, might be able to handle 99% of the cases out there. It's like that 1% of cases where maybe humans are better at recognizing the really subtle and minute things that a computer might not recognize, which you might be able to prevent a bad outcome in that makes humans. Ultimately, I don't think anyone is going to be satisfied with having an AI read every single image. You're still going to want a human radiologist to sign off on them. But what AI will do is they'll help the human radiologist review many more images by sort of triaging the things that really don't need their attention as much as the things that maybe do need their attention. That's really the direction that I think a lot of other people who watch this subject closely think is ultimately going to happen, which stat CT read at a small hospital like the one that I'm at in the middle of the night. But having more availability of radiologists might help ease some of that burden a little bit. And AI has a lot of promise on doing that kind of thing.
David, let's go back to the legal paper that you wrote. So even with dictations, like EMR makes legal cases, and you could argue that handwritten notes that you can't read are a problem. Dictated notes, EMR notes are a problem with cut and paste for litigation against doctors. It really makes a nightmare. Definitely dictation mistakes are a nightmare. Tell us a little bit about, what you spoke about in that paper as far as legal issues where doctors are setting themselves up. Maybe we would be better off writing our notes by hand than doing the AI. It seems like a great idea, but then you're getting sued for something. Like, what the heck did I just do?
To give you some context on that paper, the first half of it was a case law review. The second half of it was like a set of policy recommendations that we put forward to help address some of the issues from the first half. So currently, physicians are wholly responsible for anything that they do involving AI algorithms. So whether that you're scribing and the AI writes something you didn't say, that you didn't review when you were co-signing it, you're responsible for that. If you rely on like a clinical decision support AI that tells you to do something that's not right and you do it, then it's your fault. That's the scenario right now. We really look forward at a future which I think is rapidly coming, in which AI becomes good enough that in some places it starts to like represent or approximate the standard of care. There's this idea of like scalable privilege where you have an ER doctor at like a rural hospital in Kentucky has this patient that comes in that needs the expertise of a Stanford level ivory tower, quaternary center, sub specialist. Well, that person in the future might be able to consult an AI that uses the aggregated expertise, that specialty, and the patient at this like rural location access to something they otherwise wouldn't have. That ER doctor may not have enough experience in that super rare specialty to independently verify the output of this AI, but the AI might be good enough, verified, and well constructed enough that societally we may say this is as trustworthy as a human physician for this use. Who's responsible if that AI tells the ER doctor something that's wrong when the ER doctor like had no reason to believe that this thing would be flawed, right? So our recommendation is really to think about in the future as these systems get better, we need to spread some responsibility to the developers, these AIs, much like they do in Europe with the EU AI Act. Currently, if you're using AI, no one would say it was reasonable to wholly rely on the output of a general LLM like ChatGPT when it comes to like a high acuity use healthcare. It's very important to verify anything that you look up, even on some of the more peer-reviewed and more reliable systems. And you should always read your notes. Ultimately, you are responsible for your patient care, much in the same way that if you're working with a resident, a mid-level or something, you're responsible for that person too. It just becomes harder the more intelligent and human-like these things become.
I think the bottom line is people like the therapist better than the human, but the human's still the human, and the standard of care is still the human decision and the human interaction. So I think that's a great answer. David, you spoke to the American Osteopathic Association. The CEO invited you to speak to the Board of Trustees, and this is a DO podcast. So it's great that we're talking about AI, but I know that part of what they wanted you to speak about was, what do DOs have to do with AI, right? Like, what is the role of the Osteopathic Association, of osteopathic physicians, and AI? Can you just round out the discussion and tell us, because I don't know where the connection is. I'd love to hear that part.
There's two things. The first is that I believe that the future of AI in healthcare is osteopathic. We, as osteopathic physicians, with our philosophies and values, our holistic view of the patient, body, mind, and spirit, our osteopathic principles, our tenets, I believe that we as a group are probably the best position to help guide the development of these tools in a more humanistic way. I think the way that we view healthcare, we treat the whole person. We don't treat specific diseases or symptoms and break things down, like how everything interplays. We have a role in helping to teach the people who are developing these systems as they move from more than just medical scribes into actual virtual clinicians. Eventually, these things will be treating patients one way or another. I think that we have a role to help the people developing these systems develop them in a way that practices medicine the way that we do. Because I honestly believe that the way that we practice medicine is probably the better way to practice medicine. So we need to get our people in the room with the people that are developing these things and pass on our philosophies. We need to get in the room with policymakers and make sure that when they're writing regulations and public policy that guides how these things are developed and how they're regulated, how quality is assured, that they take our philosophy into account. And that kind of leads into the second point. We as DOs have a separate set of tools with how we diagnose and treat patients. No AI is going to know what a Chapman's point is unless we tell it what a Chapman's point is. DOs represent about a growing minority of practicing physicians in America right now. We have a duty to make sure that the people developing these AIs as clinical decision support tools, for instance, are aware of and understand osteopathic physical findings so that people who are trained in our osteopathic medical schools to know what viscerosomatics and Chapman's points and tissue texture changes, seeing a patient, and we document these things, that the AI knows how to think like us and incorporate these findings into its ability to create diagnostic recommendations. The doctor is not the best doctor anymore. Perhaps it's the doctor augmented with AI is the best doctor. We stand by the sidelines and we don't advocate for ourselves. The way that we practice might be further supplanted by allopathic practice just being the default in all of these tools. We as a group, we have a real opportunity at this moment, at the nascence of AI, to really involve ourselves in that conversation. There is a lot of excitement about AI, but there's also a lot of consternation, concern. We stand by the sidelines and we afraid of this technology and we don't embrace it. There's a good chance that other people that maybe don't share our values could drive the ship instead.
We're going to shift gears now, and I want to hear a little bit about you and your journey. David, can you tell us where you grew up and when you decided you wanted to be a doctor?
My dad was a Navy pilot. He flew Sea Sprites, Annapolis class of 88. And I grew up in a lot of beautiful places that were all oceanside. I was actually born in Hawaii, and then we were in Florida, and then Puget Sound, Washington area, and then Southern California. And then we eventually settled in Oregon, where I went to high school. And aside from a brief stint studying biotechnology my freshman year in Bremen, Germany, I went to Oregon State for my undergrad. Go Beavers. I first wanted to be a doctor, I think. Very early on, I was very attracted to the profession and everything. I was in the hospital a bit as a kid when my appendix burst on an airplane that was doing its final descent. I was in the hospital for like a week with a drain at that point, and I got an 11-year-old very enamored with the doctors who I felt saved my life, and very thankful to be there and everything. But really, the moment that captured my imagination in medicine, even more so than that, is when I was at undergrad in Oregon State. I had the opportunity to do like a long preceptorship with this amazing gastroenterologist named Dr. Chow, who was practicing in Corvallis, Oregon. And I just, honestly, the first time I saw the inside of a colon, no, it was the way that he treated patients and his relationship with them. Corvallis was kind of a small town, so everybody knew everyone. And he was just an amazing doctor. And I'm like, man, if I could treat patients with 1/10 of the skill and compassion that this man treated his patients, I knew I wanted to devote my entire life to that. So officially became pre-med, and I didn't stop till I got to med school.
You took some time between finishing undergrad and med school. Can you tell us why that was and what you did in that time before you applied to AT Still? And then can you tell us a little bit about when you found out about osteopathic medicine and that application process?
I took another deep after the end of undergrad. My brother surprised me one day with this application from the Disney College program, and the two of us went to Orlando together. He got cast as a Disney prince, which he did for like 5 years after that. Believe it or not, being a Disney prince is kind of a dead-end job.
Which prince was he?
Actually, in Disney circles, we never say that someone was a prince. Actually, we always say they were friends with. So he was friends with Aladdin and Eric from The Little Mermaid, which is, I can't really imagine two different looking princes, but to make up.
That was just interesting to me. Then he did an MBA.
Yeah, so he did an MBA as part of, during COVID, he did an MBA and finished that. And he did something which they told us when I was working at Disney that you should never do, and you would get immediately fired if you ever did this. But he walked right up to the president of the entire Disney parks and resort worldwide was visiting. Since they weren't having the characters, they stationed him on the gate, and he was out there sweating at the gate, very much not the experience of a Disney prince. And apparently the president of all Disney parks and resorts was visiting the gate at that time, and he walked right up to him and said, "Hey, I did this MBA program that was offered through Disney. It's called Disney Aspire. It's kind of like a big press point for them. I don't want a job. Do you have a job?" And the guy's like, "I'll put you in touch with some people." And so then he moved into like the finance department at Disney World. That's where he works now. So he's still at Disney, but I did a year stint there, and I met my wife. We were both working at Epcot. She is from the UK. So I always like to say that I worked in the American part of Epcot and she worked in the British part of Epcot. So before going to medical school, I took a little bit of time to figure out the whole immigration process with her, but we're now 7 years happily married. So it's complicated, but it is possible to do. And then I really found osteopathic medicine because while I was there at Disney, I was having so much fun that I didn't pay very much attention to my first medical school application. I didn't actually get any interviews that first time, which for me was the first real setback I think I had ever had in my life. And after I finished at Disney, I took a job selling power tools from Milwaukee. While I was doing that, I went back to my college at Oregon State, and I'm like, I gotta get some help because obviously I can't do this on my own. And one of the board members of the Honors College at Oregon State is DO, and he taught me about osteopathic medicine the first time. I'm like, wow, this is the way that I want to practice medicine. My gastroenterology preceptor was MD, but a lot of the things that I saw, like the way he treated patients, was totally mirrored in the way that this other guy treated patients. And then he taught me about the osteopathic principles. It just clicked. I'm like, this is it. This is me. Like, this is my tribe. This is who I was looking for. I mean, I think we've all had that moment where we're like, yeah, this is like exactly what I was looking for. So because of that, the second time I applied both allopathic and osteopathic. And I had interviews on both sides. And when I went to AT Still, I just really fell in love with their program, SOMA, the Arizona AT Still School. They had this really unique model at the time where you did your first year of didactics in Arizona, and then you did like 3 years of clinicals at a community health center. And the one that I was assigned to was just outside of Hilton Head, South Carolina, which is a beautiful place if you've ever been there before. Fate stepped in kind of around the same time that I got accepted at AT Still. That allowed me to apply for the U.S. Air Force HPSP Scholarship. I always wanted to follow my dad into the military. I never really figured out a way to do it until now. And those two things came together to osteopathic med school. And
so you finished med school at AT Still in Arizona, and you had to pick a residency. So can you tell us what drew you to internal medicine and how you picked a program, and tell us about the program that you're at now?
I originally got into internal medicine as a precursor to going to gastroenterology fellowship. From the very beginning with my preceptor way back in the day, like that was the medicine that I eventually wanted to practice. Now in the journey of doing that, that's still very much on the table, but we got an opportunity to go back to England to be close to my wife's family if I took a position in aerospace medicine. So near the end of my internal medicine residency, I made the choice to transition to flight medicine in order to get shipped to the UK and do that for a couple of years. It was also sort of a discussion with my wife, and I have two fairly young children, 4 years and 11 months now. And let's take this once in a lifetime opportunity to go to Europe and also just have a couple of years out of training to get the kids a little older before I eventually went back. But in the process of discovering aerospace medicine, wow, it's the same lightning sparks I got when I first saw GI. So there's a real future there too. So honestly, I have no idea what I'm going to do, but I am glad I picked internal medicine because it gave me a good foundation to do really any number of things going forward.
David, for myself and for our listeners, can you tell us a little bit about aerospace medicine and what the field entails?
So aerospace medicine is actually a very broad field. It involves anything from hyperbaric and deep sea medicine, which interesting that that's part of the umbrella, all the way up to space medicine, working with astronauts. More traditionally, it's working with pilots. So, in the Air Force, we're talking about aviators. The base I'm going to has a fighter mission, and so we'll be working with people that work in planes, around planes. It's really a form of occupational medicine. So in the umbrella of the AOA, aerospace medicine, so it's a branch of occupational medicine, and you're really working with people that fly and people that help the people that fly. So huge need for that in the Air Force, obviously. We keep the flyers in the air and on the ground when they need to be on the ground, keep the planes flying. There's a lot of aerospace medicine in the civilian sector as well, working with the airlines and anyone that flies anything really. So it's actually a fairly broad field.
Obviously, your dad influenced you heavily, but tell us a little bit about your decision to go into the Air Force, to take this scholarship, and what advice you would give people that are sort of overwhelmed with maybe what debt they're looking at and what the opportunities are with the Air Force.
The HPSP Scholarship is a scholarship that's offered through the Department of Defense. It allows you placement in the Air Force, Navy, or the Army. The other accessions pipeline besides the Uniformed Services University, which is an allopathic medical school that's part of the military system. So the HPSP allows people to go to a civilian medical school and then eventually assess into the military when they graduate. When you graduate from medical school, you get the choice between an active duty residency and like a civilian deferred residency. Active duty residency, you go straight into the military. Civilian deferred, you sort of remain a civilian, and then you go into the military when you're done with your residency. My advice for people that are considering doing this is it's very important to join the military because you want to join the military. There are some amazing financial benefits to this scholarship, but if you join primarily for the financial reasons, there is a chance that you may end up being disappointed, because when you join the military, the military does have a lot of say over your life. There's a lot of common conceptions. The military doesn't tell you have to specialize in a certain specialty. We have a match system that is run competitively, just like the civilian match system. But as soon as you're practicing physician, they may tell you have to go to South Dakota. So you do have to be in it for the right reasons. But if you are in it for the right reasons, it's pretty cool to come out of medical school with no debt and having been paid a stipend the entire time. And when you do come out, if you go into an active duty residency, you're one of the highest paid residents in the country. Amazing training opportunities. You certainly can't get into some of the cool aerospace medicine stuff that exists out there for people that are interested in that. It's much harder outside of the military. There's lots of unique or non-traditional training opportunities. I would argue that the military programs have a better work-life balance, at least in my experience. So there are tons of benefits, and I've had a great time and made some amazing connections.
We have a grand finale question, which is, can you give us one piece of advice that you were given from someone else that you think has been super impactful in your career that you would like to pass on to others?
My flight commander at commissioned officer training told us something which I will remember for the rest of my life and try to exhibit every day in everything that I do. His advice was, if you're the friendliest and most enthusiastic person in the room, no door is closed to you. That philosophy is something that I really try to embody every day. There was another component of what he told us, which he said, always say yes. I think I would re-edit always say yes to everything to be, don't pass up an opportunity that you're never going to get again, that you feel you should take.
David, that's great advice. Thank you so much for all of your wisdom on AI and teaching us about AI and sharing our journey with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
This concludes our episode of Do or Do Not. Send all inquiries, comments, suggestions, and even let us know if there is someone you want us to interview to doordonotpodcast@gmail.com. Don't forget to like us on Facebook at Do or Do Not Podcast for updates. If you enjoyed our podcast, please share it with your classmates and administration. We have plenty of more interviews lined up, and we're excited to share them with you. This is Tian Yu Shea. Thank you guys so much for listening to Do or Do Not.